All right, looks like we are up and running. Okay, great. Thank you everybody so much for joining me. Today is Thursday, September 24th, 2020, and this is Chisme. I'm starting tonight's Chisme knowing that many of us find ourselves in sorrow. I know that the mealworm indictments that came out of Kentucky were silent completely as to Breonna Taylor's name, but screamed a really terrible truth that so many of our Black sisters already knew. I know that women all over this country of every profession, but particularly us women attorneys, are feeling a little bit robbed of our mourning of an icon and a giant, and that our grief was aggressively interrupted by fear. But I learned recently, in the wake of the passing of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, that an expression to show respect and mourning in the Jewish faith is, may her memory be a blessing. So in that spirit, may her memory be a blessing, may her memory be a revolution, and revolutions take work. So let's get to work and let's get started on Chisme. I'm joined today by a very special guest. I'm really excited to have her, Stephanie Gattas, who is the founder and CEO of the Pink Berets. She is a veteran of the US Navy, and we're going to be hearing from her shortly about the work in her organization, how they support veterans as well as active duty women in the US military and first responders. But first up, a little bit of an update in terms of what's been going on in the Vanessa Guillen case and going on at Fort Hood. So about 2 weeks ago, a big delegation of, a delegation of lawmakers, congresspeople, including Representative Jackie Spear, Ayanna Pressley, just to name a few, traveled down to Fort Hood and kind of did an inspection of the place, and their reports after leaving there were that it was pretty abysmal. One, in terms of the conditions for the service members that were there, and then two, just the command climate, which we've heard over and over again has been a big issue there. Moving on from that delegation, so they kind of leave there, don't really like what they see. Then we've got finally the introduction of the I Am Vanessa Guillen bill in DC, which is basically trying to set up this third party that service members can go to when they need to complain about sexual harassment or sexual assault within the military. Previously, we talked about, hey, what is the bill? What's the language of the bill? Who's actually backing it? And ultimately, when it was presented, we actually saw Representative Jackie Spears, who heads up the House Committee for the Armed Services, putting her name on it, and other lawmakers as well. So it's feeling a little bit more substantial, and it seems like they were kind of coupling it with or including it with some existing legislation that had been getting worked on for quite some time. So that's finally out there, kind of in a more official capacity. So we'll be looking to see if it gets traction and movement once they're back in session and looking at these bills. I also want to note too that one of the reasons that Ayanna Pressley was there is that she was actually part of the Massachusetts delegation that went down to inspect Fort Hood, Massachusetts being the home state of Elder Fernandez, who was a soldier that was found hanging outside of Fort Hood a couple of weeks after he had reported being himself the victim of sexual assault at Fort Hood. Our last Chisme, we had the most excellent Pam Campos Palma, who is one of the awesome veterans with Vets for the People. Wanted to give you guys a little bit of a shout out. They are hosting an event on Thursday, October the 1st at 5:30 p.m. This is going to be in Austin, Texas, down at the Capitol. They're calling it a community event with other allies, where they're hosting a public trial to hold Fort Hood leadership accountable for their criminal negligence and more. So if you are in the Hill Country area or can make it out there down in Austin, they're going to be at the Capitol October 1st, 5:30 p.m. That's where they're going to be assembling and calling for more attention and accountability. Also, Vanessa's birthday is coming up. I want to say in the next couple of days. Her family has planned sort of a heavenly birthday celebration and day of celebrating and honoring her in Houston. It is open to the public. It's kind of a day-long event, and the intention there being a little bit more of a celebration versus the funeral in the morning that took place previously. I think they're going to have some performances from dance troops, also some prayer vigils and things like that led. So we'll be posting some details about that on the Chisme Facebook page. All right, with that, and with all that being said, I welcome my guest, Stephanie Gattas. Stephanie, if you could unmute yourself. Do I have to do it for you? Oh no, are you good to go, Stephanie?
So hopefully, yeah, I was trying my best not to be a cheerleader in the background with all the information you were sharing.
No, we love cheerleaders. And guys, I'm trying to make these more interactive. So if somebody has a question or a comment or just wants to get in the mix of the conversation, cheese me out, unmute yourself, jump right in. I'd love to hear it. So Stephanie, welcome to Chisme. I'm so happy to have you. If you could introduce yourself and tell us, what is Pink Berets?
I certainly will, but I do want to start off with something very quickly, if you don't mind. First of all, thank you so much for sharing the Vets for the People event, because we're going to go down to Austin to support them. We probably have a couple of caravans moving down their direction. They've been working so hard. I take zero credit. I just want you to know that Iste and Pam and the women that are putting together this plan in Austin is going to be amazing. So I just want to make sure I preface that again, because those are my hermanas, right? So, and I also want to say, you know, one day when people ask you and I, well, how did you meet? Wouldn't it be really funny to share that story? Oh, we met at a protest or a rally in Fort Hood. It's like not your typical meeting. So.
Yeah. Absolutely. Actually, yeah. So if I could share the story really quickly. So this is back in August, and it was either right before or right after. I think I had Pam on Chisme. Must have been after. And Pam sends a text and is like, "Hey, we're mobilizing at Fort Hood if you can make it." And it's a Friday afternoon, and work was slow. And my partner and I were like, "Yeah, we can." So we just hopped in our car, and 2 hours later, we're at Fort Hood, and it is. By the time I get there, it's like 104 degrees.
Yeah, it was horrible.
And it was, honestly, I've participated in some protests in the past. I did the Women's March in 2017 and some other kind of smaller things, but I had never been to something like this where it was, grief was at the center of it, and it was so palpable. So when I get there, this woman that I had been watching be this fierce force of nature on TV and from afar is 20 feet away from me, and that woman was Mama Guillen. And she is pulling no punches. She's in front of cameras. She's on a mic. And when I say that, I have no clue. It must be something divine about a mother's love, where she gets her strength from. But that 10 that you see her on in those news clips, that's her. And it was in a 104-degree heat, and she wasn't holding back. So I'm looking for Triste, who's also one of the members of Vets for the People, trying to connect, and I don't know anybody else. And the next thing I know, I'm meeting 3-4 women veterans who are like, "Oh yeah, this is us, this is what we've been doing." And without even being prompted, you guys are like, "Yep." Someone says like, "Oh yeah, yep, yes, I'm a survivor of military sexual assault." And I'm like, "Oh wow, I just introduced myself and you're ready to let me know your story." So yeah, we met on that corner right outside of Fort Hood, shouting at those cars going by, and now we've got you on the show. So I'm just excited to share your story and share your work.
Well, thank you. Thank you so very much for the platform. I do think it's very important that organizations like the Pink Berets and Vets for the People and Minority Veterans of America, not in my Marine Corps, have to give a shout out to my sisters, because organizations like these really move the needle in ensuring that women veterans are receiving the help that they need, but also the injustices behind the scenes that not everybody gets to see, especially as civilians, right? So the Pink Berets originally was started, I like to tell people it came from a place of defeat. I didn't quite understand how to help myself in the moment when I was needing it most. I didn't quite identify as somebody with PTSD or as an MST survivor. It was always a denial type thing. But I distinctly recall sitting at my kitchen table with the best friend of mine, writing notes on a napkin and trying to come up with a plan to create this organization that can help women like myself, and at no cost, because I knew there were barriers there that were financial. You know, if I needed help, what can I do to help myself? But most importantly, the programs out there in 2015 were mostly aimed at helping men, right? Men were considered the combat veterans. Men were considered the ones with PTSD. Men were identified as being the heroes. But little did anybody know there was sheroes. There was combat women veterans. And so I was told, build it and they will come, because I couldn't find anything for myself, nothing that would address the needs directly. I mean, how can you place a man and a woman in a room and say, well, we're going to treat PTSD the same way? There's no way. We're both distinctly different, obviously, right? So in building the Pink Berets, I reached out to people that I knew, that I had worked in the medical field with. I sought out professionals that could come into the organization and volunteer their time, help me build programs. I mean, I can't say I went into this with this master plan saying, this is what I'm going to do, and I had it all set up. I mean, it took a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. But ultimately, what we came up with was an organization that helped address invisible injuries, right? So you may hear stories sometimes where women park in the disabled parking spot and somebody will harass them about doing so, but not understanding they are indeed a disabled veteran, and you can't physically see what they're suffering from, but internally they're dealing with post-traumatic stress or a traumatic brain injury. I mean, run the gamut of all the differences that stand behind invisible injuries. So we built a program that would help women specific to the invisible injuries by creating holistic therapeutic options, one of those being equine therapy, another art therapy, things that weren't so traditional, right? I myself love cooking in the kitchen, and I found that to be very therapeutic. So we started a culinary cooking program, culinary art therapy cooking program called Cibo, which is Italian for food. And I completely hope I didn't butcher that name, but our team helped us come up with that concept. And I can tell you it's one of our most popular programs right now. But we just learned that along the way, these programs were working. These women felt like they had a say in what their care could look like. It wasn't somebody giving them a prescription and saying, I need you to go sit in a room and talk about your trauma for 2 to 3 hours, and then do that every week for 6 weeks. And then we'll see if you need any more help. This was saying, listen, if you need a year or more to get yourself through this, we're going to be here.
Yeah.
And if you want to cook, you know, whatever it is along the way, we can do that.
So I want to back up a little bit and have you kind of explain some of what your service history was,
Sure.
and what MST is, right? I actually learned that term, military sexual trauma, for the first time this year. I was like just today years old when I learned that term, that there's actually a diagnosis, a term for being a victim or a survivor of sexual assault that occurred in the military. Tell us a little bit about that.
Absolutely. And you would not be the only one. I've heard from a number of people. I'm not quite certain what MST means, or military sexual trauma. And so military sexual trauma is identified as either having experienced a sexual assault, sexual harassment, or gender discrimination. And so those three fall under the umbrella of military sexual trauma. And I think that's why some people have trouble understanding exactly what that is. But if you can understand, none of them are okay, especially in an establishment where you are supposed to be the elite, right? You're supposed to be the ones defending this country. So yes, that was a very good question. And for my background, I was in the United States Navy, and I served on the USS Simon Lake, which is an AS-33. We were stationed originally in La Maddalena, and that was off the coast of Italy. I know, not a bad gig, but we did do what they called tours. And so we were responsible for unloading missiles and loading missiles. So we came alongside fast frigates, destroyers, submarines. So we were a working ship. And I can tell you, when I first landed overseas, we're told, wow, this is the first time that we've seen a group of women come into the ship and start to we weren't the first. Let me preface that before I move forward. But we were starting the trend of women that were coming onto this AS-33 because it carried weapons.
Give me an idea of scale and size on that when you're talking about this vessel.
Oh gosh, so this vessel, it's, you know, it's a little town on water, if you will. So you had anywhere between 1,000 to 2,000 people, depended. But I mean, it wasn't like an AS, it wasn't like an aircraft carrier. An aircraft carrier was essentially a city on water. So this was a smaller scale, but you still had over 1,000 people working on that ship.
And how many women, give or take?
Oh God, we were not the majority. The men were the majority for absolute certain.
So kind of pioneers in a sense, and then what's the response that you get? 100% support from your male comrades? No, not so much.
No, gosh, I wish that was the case. And, you know, I like to tell people, you know, the military made me who I am today, right? To continue to be of service to others. I want to make that clear. But I can tell you, in some respect, it wasn't well received. When I first got there, I was timid, as some people would probably find that really hard to believe today, right? I was told, oh, well, we heard you're a lesbian because you won't sleep with anybody here. I was like, well, what does that have to do with anything? Right? I didn't quite understand what that meant. And I thought, okay, is this where we're going? Is this how I'm being subjected to my brothers in arms?
Yeah.
And then the next level was speaking to you in a way that was less than dignified. And so I come from a very strong family background, right? And not the kind of family that you could rake over the coals, right? They were just very strong-willed. And so I grew up around strong-willed individuals. However, I wasn't as vocal. And so going into the military and realizing, wow, this is like, I have to fend for myself now.
Yeah.
So I did just that, and oftentimes would get in trouble for doing so. So I learned that, oh, I had a voice, I can fight back. Not to say I always won, but I noticed then that I had to champion other women because I wouldn't cry. So it was like, well, we're not going to break Stephanie, so let's move on to the next person and the next person and the next person. And what I did witness was a lot of women of color were being verbally attacked. And I would tell them, listen, we can't allow them to do that. Like, let's cry later in our racks where they don't see us, but not do it in front of them. Like, we have to fight back. We have to let them know it's not okay. And so in doing that, it caused this uproar, if you will. And I was told to stop. I was told, you need to stop telling these women to defend themselves. We're not okay with what you're doing here.
Wow.
And so, oh yeah, I remember that part like it was yesterday, because in my mind, I was like, well, what's wrong with defending ourselves? Like, that's what we're here for, to defend our country. But if we have to defend ourselves against you first, well, isn't that good practice?
Yeah, don't take it from anybody, not even us. So go ahead, sorry.
No, I'm just saying it was just, you know, you recall a lot that happened then, that's all. And it's not to say that it was all bad, but when you do recall the things that you went through and you think you came out of it unscathed, but you really didn't.
What gaps do you feel like the pink beret fills that, say, the VA, right? If any one of these women veterans were to go to the VA to try to get treatment for that, the VA is just not just not getting it, just not speaking the right language, not really understanding the situation?
That's a very good question. And I do think that the VA tries their, and some may argue this, but I've been at ground zero, right? I know that the VA is trying what they can or however they can to help the alarming amount of people that are coming through their doors needing help. And so I think the way that we fill those gaps is that we bring in the women that are either on a waiting list or women that do not want to have a record indicating that they have a mental health issue that won't allow them to maybe move up in rank or to receive a promotion or to automatically be targeted because they've spoken up about their invisible injury. So I think that we fill the gap in terms of safety. And I mean that in terms of a woman knowing that when she comes into the Pink Berets, her information is strictly confidential. We have a clinical director. I don't even see that information. So the information is heavily secured, right? And I can tell you that the other gap that we fill is that you don't always find organizations that are willing to offer services at no cost, especially the level of services that we offer. And the fact that we're really consistently trying to develop programs that we know would be of benefit for them. And also we're in Military City, USA. What better place to build your organization than in the very city that will need you in the present and in the future. So
I think one of the things that I think is really cool about your organization is that I think it helps lend to this broader landscape of normalizing seeking mental health treatment. I am a huge fan of therapy. In fact, I just told my therapist the other day that I kind of felt cheated on because she was booked throughout the week after I got back from vacation. So one, I just want to thank you guys for being a part of that broader landscape of making mental health more accessible by making it free and being out there and talking about it, having PTSD or having MST or surviving some other trauma event, and making it's okay to come here and get this kind of help in however that you need it. So I'm wondering, do you feel like you're seeing a change at all within the ranks of that kind of understanding of how active duty and veterans need to care for those invisible wounds?
I have definitely seen a shift over the years. So I can tell you initially you had this really heavy stigma associated with PTSD and MST, especially in women, right? Because we know that the men also suffer from those invisible injuries, but I could tell you that it was a very uncomfortable conversation for some people when you wanted to talk about the problem that is military sexual trauma, right? It's wanted to run away from that conversation, whereas now people are more open to discussing it, especially because it is a big issue. And we do call it an epidemic because with Vanessa Guillen's story, she became this catalyst, and we've used that term over and over and over again because there's no better way to define it. She became this catalyst in being able to draw attention to a problem that people did not want to address or discuss. And if you can imagine, some women have been addressing military sexual trauma for over 30 years. And it's like, why has it taken that long? And so I felt like she definitely helped us move the needle forward. And I know she's here in spirit some way, somehow, with all of us that are working towards that progression. I like to tell people too, this isn't about a movement. It's about progress. We have to continue working against the status quo. We have to ensure that the women that have not lifted their voices are heard. And we have to make sure that what happened to Vanessa and the women before her, like Lavina Johnson and Tina Priest, it doesn't happen again. And I like to say not on my watch, because I can tell you that the Pink Berets team is unstoppable. I mean, the people that we have on our team, I consider a dream team. And I know they're just as passionate about this, but also the women that I've been working alongside in the grassroots initiatives, the women's grassroots initiatives, and also with Vets for the People. I mean, they won't stop at anything until justice is brought forward. And can you imagine, I've said this time and time again, if it takes us years, if it takes the rest of our lives to ensure that there is change, then that's what's going to happen. So be it.
I think we sometimes talk about this idea of our government, our country having gotten us into these sort of endless wars, or these wars with no end. But it sounds like you guys are pretty dedicated to waging this war until it meets its end, until this is stamped out. I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit, Stephanie, on, you mentioned the group minority vets, kind of the experience of being Latina in the military, being a proud veteran, and your culture. If you can kind of speak to that a little bit.
Absolutely. So, I mean, again, thank you for saying that. I am a proud veteran. I am proud that I served our country. But I think that there needs to be more of a unified effort across the board within the military and within the ranks. And I mean that in that whether you are Hispanic, whether you are African American, whether you're Asian, whether you're Dominican. I mean, I met people from all over the world, from Haiti, and we all had the same goal. We all had the same mission, and that was to defend our country with our lives. And so for me, there should be no greater way than to show respect to every single person that is in the military, regardless of their background, regardless of their culture. I mean, did I find that as a Latina, people worked against me? Sure. I remember one instance where I was told, shut up and go eat tacos. And I thought, what does that have to do with it? I like pizza. You know what I mean? Like, it didn't make any sense to me. But in my mind, like, that was their thought process. They somehow equated Hispanic people and tacos. So it was just like, okay, I see what's happening here. And so it was those types of things that you felt you always had to defend yourself against, was the racism. So I think that there has been a lot of change in the years. I think that people are fighting for themselves. I think that many Latin people have proved their worth. It's unfortunate that they've had to do that, but they have gone on to do great things. And I'm proud of that. I'm proud of my background. I'm proud of where I come from. I'm proud to represent who I do, which is the Latin community. All communities really, but if we got to talk about what we encountered, yeah.
It was kind of one of the other sort of bittersweet parts about meeting you on that corner across the street from Fort Hood was just getting the opportunity to meet these veterans who are women, but also they're veterans who are women who are Latina. And it was, for me as a Latina, extremely inspiring to learn that, like, our strength in numbers as a community that exists, as a people that exists, seems to be also represented in the military. And while I think we can argue that sometimes that could be a little bit predatory depending on where that's coming from, just to see that, like, the hermanas aren't taking it lying down, just like you said. So it was really cool. And it seems to be that people are able to celebrate their pride in their service, as well as celebrate their pride in their culture without having to compromise one or the other. And I feel like that's not a message that we get a lot from the kind of the, rah patriot, support the troop crowd.
Absolutely.
So I think that's
absolutely.
So Pink Berets, focuses on providing treatment and support. You mentioned equine therapy, kind of cooking therapy. On the note of cooking, you guys have an event coming up. Tell us a little bit about that.
We do. Thank you for opening up that equation. So we have what we're called, it's our first of its kind, by the way. We thought it was a perfect opportunity to do this. So with these organizations coming to San Antonio, we thought it would be a great opportunity to do a vet chef cook-off. So the reason we did that, and I find it pretty funny, we all stay in daily communication. And one of the women, Lucy Delgado, she loves to post pictures of the things that she cooks, and I salivate. I see her pictures and the things that she's cooking, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I wish I was in New Jersey. But either way, when we received word through our communications that they were absolutely certain they were coming to San Antonio, we decided that a great way to host them was through one of our culinary programs and to have this vet chef cook-off. So the vet chef cook-off is on Tuesday evening, and it will consist of Minority Vets of America competing against the Pink Berets cooking team for bragging rights. There will be a medal that's awarded. We have 3 judges on the panel. One is a local foodie influencer. Another one is a chef, Chef Cortez, by the way. And then we have a TV personality who will be our virtual host for the event as well. So I'm excited about that. I know there's going to be a lot of bloopers. I know there's going to be a lot of laughs, but really it's about bringing us together, you know, regardless of where we come from and what organizations we have. Invisible Combat couldn't be here, but they're another great organization that's out of California, and those are also, you know, our sisters in arms from afar. They're also, I wanted to note, they're going to be participating live with us on Wednesday. But yeah, the cooking event, I think everybody will find really fun.
And to support you guys, you know, because you mentioned, I think this is so huge. You guys provide your services at no cost.
That is correct.
How can people support and contribute to your mission?
You know, we rely a lot on in-kind donations. We rely a lot on sponsorships. If you have a business that wants to sponsor an equine program or possibly our art program, things of that nature always helps. Like for instance, for our culinary program, HEB is our sponsor for that program.
Oh,
and so
I don't have it in Dallas. I miss it so much.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I'm a super fan, obviously, because they are so supportive of the veteran organizations. And obviously, of course, being in Military City, USA, you see that support across the board from HEB. So just not only that, you know, I do talk about sponsorships and in-kind donations and things of that nature, but really, if you know of somebody that needs our help, by all means, please share our information with them. Because we exist for the very reason that women come to us to get assistance. And so we want to make sure that we can continue to spread the message and continue to advocate the way that we do for the women that need the help.
Where can people go to donate?
They can go to www.thepinkberets.org.
Awesome. And that chef cook-off, where can they find that event?
It's going to be a Facebook Live event, and it will commence at 6 o'clock on Tuesday evening. Obviously, with COVID restrictions, we had to do Facebook Live, but we will be operating out of the Alamo Kitchens in Castle Hills here in San Antonio.
Very cool, very cool. And then one last thing, I think this is like a really cool thing that you guys do. I know we've got some moms and dads watching with us. You guys do a really cool story time event. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so I like to credit my daughter for that. Obviously, with distance learning coming into play, one of the projects that she had was to find a book, write about the book, and talk about what inspired her in the book. And so we went and bought a book, and it was called A is for Awesome. And it talked about 23 iconic women. And she loved it because it taught her about all these different women in history. And so I thought, I would love to share this with the younger generation. I would love for them to be inspired at a young age and know that they can do anything, but also bring that sense of empowerment aside from really what we're subjected to today. It's just not the normal climate, and it's definitely not something that has really allowed for children to be themselves, you know, to go to the places that they go to and play. The original idea was that we would do this at a Barnes and Noble, but they're no longer allowing that to happen there. So we did it in one of my spaces in my house. And I read the book that I found so fascinating that I thought would really be something that little girls could aspire to, or perhaps be inspired by. So thank you for mentioning that. That's one of my new favorite series that we started. Amber, who is on our team, she handles our PR. She showed up with, you know, the what do you call it? I'm not on social media, or I don't do selfies, so I don't know what all this stuff is. But it's like
ring light?
The ring light, a ring light, a stand. I mean, she came with all the equipment. I was like, what is this? What's going on? And I was like, wow, she's got this down. So it made it feel.
Number.
Yeah. It was awesome though. And so, yeah, we're planning on doing that and inviting different guests. As a matter of fact, the founder of Invisible Combat is going to take on one of those Her Story series and read a book with her daughter. So we invite other women with their daughters to get on our list that we're quickly filling, to be a part of that Her Story hour and continue to help us inspire young little girls.
That's fantastic. Stephanie, thank you so much for joining us on Chisme. ThePinkBerets.org. They're also on Facebook at The Pink Berets and on Instagram as well. Go give them a follow. Support them the way you can. They are doing extremely important work to support our veterans who are women, as well as active duty women and first line responders. So Stephanie, thank you so much for joining us and for your mission and the work that your organization's doing.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you. You have a new fan.
Thank you. I'm picking. I was deciding. I'm like, I like hanging out with these veterans. They're like kind of like a wild crowd in a good way. You know, like you don't know where it's going to go, but you want to go along for the ride.
Yeah, so unpredictable.
So thanks so much.
Thank you. Appreciate you.
All right, guys, I'm going to spend the rest of our time going over some important deadlines when it comes to voting in the census. But before we get to that, I got a little bit of a fly in my drink with some news that came out recently from ICE. For me, the #1 agency that I want to abolish. So as I'm sure many of you are aware or have heard by now, a couple weeks ago, a whistleblower, a nurse, Dawn Wooten, came forward and filed a whistleblower complaint against ICE. She was working at a detention center in Georgia, where she observed not only just abysmal conditions in terms of caring for and preventing things around COVID-19, but the most horrifying allegation in her complaint is that women were being subjected to forced sterilizations. In other words, they were having hysterectomies performed on them without their consent or without their informed consent or knowledge. At this point, investigations are pending. A group from Congress demanded investigations from ICE. ICE is just patently denying all of it, saying it's completely fabricated and there's nothing to back it up. I'm expecting to see a report issued tomorrow per the request that was coming from Congress. We'll see what comes of it, but I'll keep you guys updated. One of the things that I wanted to, the reason I'm bringing it up is that when this news broke, and I posted about it on my social media and on Chisme's page, was the response from a lot of people that I saw was like, oh man, like the Nazis. Pump the brakes. The Nazis, they were terrible. They committed a horrible mass genocide. But we can't keep giving them credit for all of the horrors that humans are capable of. Unfortunately, the idea of forced sterilizations, eugenics, and miscegenation, ladies and gentlemen, that's 100% made in the USA. We actually have a history that goes back, at least I know, further than 100 years in this country. I think it was 1907 that the first eugenics law was passed that would allow for forced sterilizations to happen. And historically, these procedures and the laws that were allowing them were being conducted on women of color, Black women, Latino women, and poor women. So sorry about it, but we didn't get this idea from the Nazis. It's in fact the other way around. They get that idea from us. So after 1907, when the first state passes that law, quickly thereafter, 31 other states followed suit. And it would take decades of litigation to undo those laws that were allowing that. In the meantime, hundreds of thousands of women were falling victim to different forced sterilization schemes within the system, where I think it was, oh, and I want to give credit where credit's due, is Indiana, where that first sterilization law was passed. Yeah, under those laws, about 60,000 people were sterilized in procedures that today we would call compulsory, forced, and involuntary. So we're talking about women that are going in for one procedure and then coming out and having part of their reproductive system removed. The other thing I wanted to draw your attention to is that in the 60s and 70s, and this is particular to the Latino community, there was a practice in California county jails of, county hospitals. Women would go in, Latina women, Mexican migrant women would go in to give birth. And in the course of giving birth, they were receiving sterilizations and hysterectomies and not being none the wiser about it, things that they did not consent to whatsoever. So there's actually there was a lawsuit out of that. And there's a documentary that I'm going to try to figure out a way to screen for us. It's called No Mas Bebés, and it is about the litigation that followed the decades of horror and forced sterilizations in California county hospitals, particularly on Mexican women. So I'm bringing that up because it's really important. We're at a time right now where people, unfortunately, this administration is treating the facts of history as if there's some value judgment to them and that we can keep some things in the shadows because they're ugly. We've got to put light on all of it. So No Mas Bebés, check it out. And you can actually, if you go to nomasbebesmovie.com, I think you can stream it on your personal computer or device for like $6. But if anybody else is interested in watching this film or Chisme doing a screening, get with me afterwards. Reach out to me either on the Facebook, or if you've got my number, text or email me. I'm on Facebook and Instagram, Chisme, a virtual call to action. I'd like to try to do a big screening of this film because I think it's really important that people learn this part of our history, as ugly as it is, to put it in context. And then the last thing I'll say is this: while ICE is flat out denying that this is taking place, we're starting to see reports of more and more women coming forward saying that this happened to me, or I think that this happened to me, or something happened that wasn't supposed to. And one of those women who was literally on the tarmac about to get deported to Cameroon until Congress got involved, is coming up and speaking forward. So it just, if nothing happened, it kind of makes you wonder what's the rush to deport somebody, or why I tried to hurry them up out of here. So fortunately, that woman was actually taken off the plane, wasn't deported. ICE's claim is that it had to do with issues with the Cameroonian paperwork. The important thing is she's still here on US soil and available for what are hopefully going to be upcoming investigations into those allegations. All right, taking a look at voting, right? So our second calls to action, our second and third calls to action at Chisme are get our gente counted. September 28th is the last day to take your census. If you think you even know somebody that hasn't taken their census and been counted, help them out. You can actually do it for online. Remember, there is no citizenship question, and you do not have to be a citizen to be counted. Important voting deadlines. October 5th is the deadline to register to vote. And actually, I want to ask Eric, Mr. Sevilla, are you with us?
I am.
You've been working at some really excellent voter registration efforts this week. You partnered up with the Mavs. You guys had something going on at the AAC. Tell us a little bit about that and some events coming up where people can go get registered if they haven't yet.
Absolutely. We've actually marched to the polls, and of course the Latino Voter Empowerment Coalition have been working in conjunction with a couple of teams, actually the Texas Rangers and the Dallas Mavericks. Dallas Mavericks are really doing some interesting things in terms of voting. They've got, a lot of their vice presidents working towards encouraging people to get out to vote. They're going to work with us. We created a coalition of nonprofits. March to the Polls kind of got it started, and that coalition is called Dallas Votes. And we've been talking to the commissioners' courts about assisting them with making safe and accessible elections here in Dallas County. there's been a number of groups that have been popping up around the country, of course, in terms of handling elections. Of course, everybody knows that elections are handled at that local level, at that county level, especially here in Texas. So some real concerns about what's happening in this voting time during this pandemic. Here in the state of Texas, of course, some of these ballots are going to be incredibly long. Here in Dallas County, some of them are as long as almost 70 pages long. People don't realize that. We've been pushing elections over, and they're going to be occurring now. You take that into consideration, the voting times on election day could be incredibly long because of that. There's no straight ticket voting, which many people don't realize and understand. There's going to be people wearing masks. The communication issues are going to be popping up. So we kind of ran some numbers and kind of the realization that, that it may take 2 to 3 times longer to actually cast your ballot than it has in the past election. So with that in mind, we've been trying to work with the Commissioner's Court to increase the number of early polling locations, election day locations. Houston, Harris County has been doing an incredible job. They've been, they have a number of, they've been creating 8 to 10, I think 24-hour early polling sites, incredible stuff. A lot of the polling sites are gonna be open till 10 o'clock. We don't have any of that in Dallas County, and it's really unfortunate. We really need to understand what's happening to, quite honestly, flatten that voting curve that needs to happen. As you mentioned, October 5th, we're in the process of registrations. We need to get as many people registered as possible, especially the young people, first-time voters. They understand what's going on. They need to understand that it's very, very easy to register. Here in Texas, of course, there's a lot of events going on. Tomorrow, we're going to be in West Dallas, March to the Polls, in conjunction with the Texas Rangers Foundation. We're going to be at their facility at 2303 Bicker Street, which is a really cool facility, from 11:30 to 2. And we're working with the North Texas Food Bank along those lines as well. And everybody who kind of comes through is going to get 20 pounds of produce. So we're you know, we're not trying to encourage them to necessarily do that because of the registration thing, but hey, if that gets them out there, then more power to them. But the Dallas Mavericks, again, have created a series called The Huddle, where they're having some incredibly interesting conversations around voting. They're doing it monthly for the next few months, so I think that's really encouraging. Next week, we're working on doing some other registration voting events with them. We, like you had mentioned earlier, we're at their facility on Stemmons this past week doing registrations. Even though we were in the rain, it was incredibly successful. We had a number of cars. You know, it was a careful drive-through registration event. They got some swag, which was cool. So encourage everybody that you can, especially the young people, to register to vote. The easiest way to do it, of course, here in Dallas County, go to dallascountyvotes.org. You can pull down a registration request. You can print it, fill it out, and it's postage paid. Put it in the mail and get yourself registered that way. October 5th is the deadline. So take that into consideration. People should be getting, if they're doing it by mail, should be doing it as quickly as possible. So if you guys have any questions about that, just encourage people to early vote. October 13th is early voting day. Believe it or not, some states are already voting. You guys can see that, you know, on television and other things. I am really concerned about the rhetoric coming from the top in terms of mail-in ballots. Unfortunately, today, you know, it looks like Paxton has filed criminal charges against some commissioners out of Gregg County. So unfortunately, I think we're going to start seeing that. There's going to be some push to maintain that mail-in ballots are bad. So when Trump loses, he's going to raise a stink. And as we all know, he said he may not go lightly into that gentle night. So we need to take these things very seriously and concerned. We need to get out and vote. We just need to overwhelmingly just beat the crap out of this guy and get as many votes as possible. So October 5th, deadline for registration. Let's make it happen and get those young people out there to the polls.
Got to get it done. And what I'm hearing based off of, you know, kind of these studies that you guys are looking at and how the length of these ballots, communication issues, COVID, we're also having an issue where, you know, we need poll workers. We need folks out there. We especially need Spanish speaking poll workers. So if you are able to, either during early voting or on November 3rd, if you can work as a poll worker, you've got to dedicate to doing it for the whole day. Maybe you can take a sick day at work and you've got an awesome boss that gets why it's important to save the democracy. But if you're a Spanish speaker and you're a registered voter, we need Spanish speaking poll workers. So in your county, whether it's Dallas County, Harris County, wherever you're listening from or you're voting from, go to your elections department and figure out how to get signed up to work with them, because we need those people. This isn't, usually you go to the polling place and it's retired folks and, you know, older folks out there. Hey, this is not the time that we want our elderly out in big crowds right now, right? We've got to step up and protect our elders right now. So those of you that can, especially Spanish speakers, please, please, please consider working as a poll worker this year. That doesn't mean what I used to think it meant, which is probably good because I'm not that flexible. So with that being said, on that note, we're at the end of our hour, and as has become kind of my tradition, I'll be offering up my closing argument for this Chisme. So a saying in Spanish, el pueblo unido jamás será vencido, which translates loosely to the people united will never be defeated. But I think today that phrase sounds kind of like a fairy tale written in an ancient language. The long lost dialect of cooperation and collective action for a greater good against the greatest enemy. Look, I know Latinos are not a monolith. Our differences are generational. They're geographic, socioeconomic, and religious. I know that when I urge my familia to go vote, not every tío or prima is going to vote my way, the way I want them to. But not fear, nor division, nor cognitive dissonance will keep me from encouraging all of us to get out the vote. Why? And it's because voting and our participation in a democracy is for all of us. Just like any muscle in our body, if we don't exercise our right to vote, it's going to atrophy and it's going to weaken to the point that it can be taken from us. And that is exactly what they're attempting to do right now. So all of our voices have to be heard, even the ones we don't disagree with, because the thing that we're fighting for, the bigger thing, is the ability to keep showing up and having a voice. So growing up, I really struggled with my Mexican-American identity immensely. I'm the daughter of a young Mexican immigrant and a ginger-headed white guy from her high school that gave me my last name. I didn't have to try to be white, because that's easy when your family lovingly refers to you as La Güera. But to be recognized as Mexicana too, that was a battle. It was the, she dances funny because she's white from my primos, despite me speaking better Spanish than the rest of them. It was my homegirls in middle school decked in their nameplates and lip liner that gave me shit for carrying around my clarinet and being in honors classes with all the white girls, even though I was the only one that did the Cinco de Mayo program. It was having to explain to my white male vice principal why being told that someone was going to call immigration on me might be offensive. And it was being too intimidated by the unapologetic authenticity of my Chicano classmates to take more Mexican-American studies courses in undergrad. And all of that was bullshit. I had just as much claim to being Latina as anybody else. In the seminal movie, Selena, James Frank almost plays Selena's father, Abraham Quintanilla. And in this iconic scene, and I know so many of us know which one I'm talking about, he explains to her the challenges of trying to be a Mexican entertainer in an American landscape. Remember, he says, we have to know what? We have to know Oprah y Cristina. We've got to eat pizza y tacos. We've got to be both. I'm here to say, no disrespect to Mr. Quintanilla, that's bullshit too. Our participation in a democracy isn't being white enough, being American enough. Our participation in a democracy is valid because we are human beings. So don't let anybody or sentiment or fear or feel with those shitty posts on Facebook that you should really need to snooze for your own mental health, and I'm gonna do the same. get in your way of making sure that every single one of us is heard on November 3rd. And if you can't do that, if you start running scared, well, you know what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna talk shit. Guys, that's Chisme. Thank you so much for joining me. Eric Cedillo, always with great information. Stephanie Gattas with the Pink Berets. Excellent, amazing work. Please go support their organization if you can. Go check out Vets for the People. Check out Chisme, a virtual call to action on Instagram and Facebook. Everybody, have a great night. Make sure you're registered and make a plan to vote. Let's do it.
Do it.